Welcome to The Sensualist, where we take on the deeper subjects of life, love, sex, and personal happiness. I'm your host, Freya Norden. Remember to like and subscribe.
Albert, I was so excited that you agreed to be a guest. I have a million questions for you since I've seen the incredible things you have been posting over the years. For the sake of our listeners, I'm going to start with, you're a director with a background in film. What made you get into hypnosis in the first place?
That's a really good question. I would describe myself as somebody with zero, not quite zero interest, but I think I had a natural skepticism. I thought that hypnotists were a kind of pseudoscientific, wackadoodle kind of area of culture. And it was a very specific experience. I made a documentary way back that dealt with 9/11, and I foolishly acquired footage. The film dealt with the way people died, unfortunately, in the incident, and I foolishly obtained a lot of the footage of horrific scenes, and this was necessary for the film, and watched them often alone because I was trying to get ahead of my schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Make a long story short, I got traumatized. And I think I have a background with a certain amount of trauma to begin with, but it really brought my traumas to the surface to the point where I was aware that I had become anxious and had trouble sleeping, and just became much more of a troubled person than I was like a month ago. And I saw an ad, and it was funny. I've since tried to find this guy, but I can't remember who it was. I saw an ad online where somebody said, the ad said something like, "Do you have obsessive memories that you can't get out of your head? Call this number, free consultation," or whatever. And so I don't know why, because I'm not the kind of person who calls these numbers, but I did. I call this number. This guy says, "I'm going to do something called hypnosis." I mean, I knew what he meant, but in half an hour, a troubling memory that had really tortured me for, day in and day out, instantly disappeared. And you would probably know the protocols involved, but I was amazed. And right there, I decided I should learn how to do this because I was like a working journalist, and I was quite aware that all my friends, my journalist friends, had a lot of trauma that they were not dealing with. I was like, oh, here's such an easy way to deal with it. So that was my doorway in, and it was just had such a good effect on me. And I was a deep skeptic. I was not somebody inclined to be interested in hypnosis. And then as I got into it, my mind was blown over and over again by the implications. And it's since completely changed my life. So I should probably end there because I can go on.
Oh no, that's a
Uh,
great intro. That's a great intro. I love the ones that are like you experienced it for yourself and knew, okay, this is
yeah,
this is the direction I should go in.
I know. I found it is a cliche where people often say, "Oh, I was a skeptic and now I'm a believer." I was a skeptic. I did not believe in the therapeutic value of hypnosis until I experienced it, and then I was shocked.
It is one of those subjects, though. A lot of people think of it as being quackery or some sort of fake alternative woo-woo stuff, but it is very based in science. It works, and you and I have both seen the evidence of that. I do want to ask you about a documentary that I've seen that you're working on called Make Orgasms Not War. I usually get straight to the sex point, so I'm doing that this time.
Yeah.
What is that?
Thank you for asking. So Make Orgasms Not War is something I've been sitting on for a while. And it's funny, we when we talk briefly, I think many in the hypnosis community have known about this crazy wrinkle. I don't know how else to describe it in hypnosis. A wrinkle would be a wrong even term for it, but the fact is that kind of the way I happened on this was maybe about 10 years ago. I went to a stage hypnosis show and in Las Vegas. And at the end of the show, the hypnotist said, now you're going to have everyone's on stage is going to have a massive orgasm. That's what happened. People had, appeared to have orgasms on stage, and now the audience went berserk because it was so funny. And it was an interesting moment for me because I remember being struck by the audience really didn't care about what I cared about, meaning they didn't care whether the orgasms are real or not, which I thought would have huge implications that you could snap your fingers and somebody would have orgasms within a
Mm.
second. They just thought it was ridiculously funny. And then everybody went home because they were probably all drunk, you know. And I was struck by this sort of weird twist that there seemed to be a phenomenon out there, and you would know about this, meaning stage hypnosis shows, especially the sort of late night variety, do this quite often, where you can take people, you can put them on a stage, and you can apparently give them the best orgasms of their lives, yet nobody cares about this therapeutically, or nobody even, or even bigger, nobody cares about the implications. So at that time, I thought this is a great idea for a documentary, and it would be obviously an interesting subject. But like a lot of other hypnotists, I ran, I found that first of all, when I would interview people, hypnotists would act, not you, and not maybe Kaz Riley, some of these people that are maybe in this field, but people would act like you would broach some terrible secret, terrifying secret, because I think many hypnotists either work in erotic hypnosis or have done it, but they don't want to be known as doing it.
That's a dirty secret.
It's a dirty secret, and it doesn't benefit you. One might think, oh, wow, having this sort of sexy side to your practice would be great, but in fact, it doesn't seem that way. It actually hurts your practice because, and you might know this phenomenon as well. The minute you find yourself either working or talking about sexual affairs, you are shuttled into a ghetto. And it happens very practically right now on social media because I've seen it myself where I have a fairly popular YouTube channel and other channels as well. And if I write, if I do, sorry, I post a video about some wild aspect of hypnosis, that's great. Sometimes will go viral. You would think you post a video about sexuality, about something amazing about sexuality, and there's a big audience. Quite the contrary. It immediately gets shuttled off into a dark corner of the internet by the algorithm. Not in every case, but I think people think, oh, that would, you're posting sexual content, that would immediately flare up all over the place. But no, because I think the algorithms are so American, and Americans are so culturally prudish. It's just the truth. I'm not saying individual Americans, but the corporate culture is,
Mhm.
as opposed to Europeans, that sexual content is immediately downgraded. Anyway, sorry, I'm not answering your question, but so when I looked into sexual hypnosis, to me it wasn't just that it was sexy. It wasn't just that it was amazing that in a matter of seconds you can count people down to powerful orgasms. And it isn't just that you can take people or walk people through multiple orgasms, easily in these sort of hypnotic states. That I had a client who, and this is really what got me sort of into it, who was thrown from a horse and his back was broken. And he came to me for pain mainly, and I would do hypnosis on him. And he was able to partially walk with the assistance of two canes. And I, at that time, I remembered that when I had started the research on hypnotic sexuality, I'd interviewed an orgasm expert who explained to me that orgasm is profoundly spinal, meaning
Hmm.
it goes up and down the spine, which explains why people often curl their toes when they have orgasms. That's because it's the spine. It's hitting the end of the spine in effect. And so this guy had all these spinal issues, and he never was able to, in a sense, heal or exercise his spine. So, make a long story short, I tested if he could have a hypnotic orgasm, and he did. And then I lined him up, him being heterosexual, I lined him up with a female hypnotist that he was more comfortable with. And using hypnotic orgasms and hypnotic sexuality, this guy experienced a massive improvement in mobility, self-confidence, and health due to hypnotic orgasms. That opened the door for me where you would know this, but it opened the door and I realized there are all these implications. It can help disabled people. It can help the elderly. It can help people with anorgasmia. It can help people chase goals in life. It helps dramatically within weeks of experiencing hypnotic sexuality. Most people experience an improvement in their complexions. And I've done enough of it to see that this is consistent, meaning you take somebody who's never had hypnotic orgasms before, you give them hypnotic orgasms, and everybody in their life starts going, "What happened to you? You're looking really good these days."
That is incredible. And I still need to know what Make Orgasms Not War is.
Sorry.
No, I
So,
don't say sorry. I loved all that information. It was amazing.
yeah. So I, part of the problem was I couldn't find beyond these sort of, interesting hypnotists who were doing interesting, maybe experiments. I couldn't find a central angle to hang a film on until I found this woman, Mary Christine Van Funk, who's actually known as the Austrian laughter queen. She has no connection to hypnosis beyond the fact that she came to a online workshop I offered on the question was, can you experience a hypnotic orgasm? Anyway, she is well known in the laughter community, laughter practice community, because she is the sort of most prominent laughter person in Austria. She came to this workshop and had an amazing experience, uh, and then asked basically if she could experiment. I think she didn't actually quite have a hypnotic orgasm, one to find out if she could. And then I did a bunch of workshops with her where, and you have probably experienced this, is that some people are just unbelievable. They can go into trance and there are absolutely no limits to what they can do. They can have 45 orgasms in a row. They can have an orgasm in under a minute. And these things matter because I don't know if you probably know this, but um, uh, according to science, women and probably men cannot arrive at orgasm without 14 minutes, usually of some kind of manual stimulation.
14?
Yeah, it's actually 13 minutes and 45 seconds. Like you can look it up.
Okay.
It's, but as you know, in hypnosis, all bets are off. The rules are completely different. And women and men can arrive at orgasm. Well, we have a bit of a game going on, but first we were less than a minute. Then we're like less than 45 seconds. Now we're below 30 seconds. So to answer your question, Mary Christine is a pacifist. She started to believe that her work in laughter was based on the idea that if you got more of the world laughing, you would have less of a violent, aggressive world. And I told her about the research and then had been intrigued about research showing that there's a strong correlation between sexual frustration and war, on not just war, but cultural violence. So, for example, I think there's the old cliche. which is wrong, that sexually frustrated men act out violently on women. That I don't think is the important part. What's more important is that the sort of crazy, really dangerous people, like school shooters, like suicide bombers, there's almost always a sexual frustration angle.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so suddenly, sort of together, we suddenly kind of had this epiphany that that if more of the world was orgasmic, more of the world was finding its way to healthy, meaningful, and loving orgasms, we would have a far less violent, warlike society than we do right now. So that's where Make Orgasms Not War came from.
That's really beautiful. And is that something that is underway right now, or what's going on with that for you?
Yeah, so the initial, so then basically, um, Mary Christine decided that she wanted to explore every possible. So first, what's interesting is that she learned how to hypnotize herself. She trained herself in basic self-hypnosis, and she can hypnotize herself to have powerful hypnotic orgasms. Then she started wondering, what are the different styles? So when we explored it in a workshop setting, one of the things she found fascinating was she had a mangasm. So what that is she was hypnotized to orgasm like a man. And she was so struck by the experience of feeling exactly like a man. She basically, this sounds funny, but she basically fucked herself. I can't find a more polite way to say it, but she experienced herself penetrating herself, having a massive ejaculatory orgasm as a man and as a woman. And that was so mind-blowing for her that she now explored a whole bunch of other orgasms. Some of this I've done with her, and some she's done on her own. So, for example, the other thing we explored is something called the flattergasm. I was struck by the idea that in hypnosis, we're always trying to create very suggestible states. So, and it's a really interesting question. You know, you can hypnotize somebody and you can tell them they're a better public speaker. And because they're in a suggestible state, their unconscious mind might be more receptive to that. But one of the questions is what makes them more receptive? You know, probably you would know it's the more resource state. You know, when
Hmm.
you resource them into the ways they already are a good public speaker. Anyways, I was struck by the fact that that orgasm itself, the moment of orgasm, is a very, very suggestible state. And in our culture, the orgasms is widely wasted, meaning especially men, and you would know this, have orgasms like about dumb things, like wow, what a great ass, an orgasm, you know. And so what are you learning and where are you headed? And I this is something I personally as a man have wrestled with. And so the flattergasm, we explored this thing called the flattergasm. The idea was, what if at the exact moment of orgasm, when people really are at their most suggestible, now that's my theory. I mean, I believe it. I don't know if there's
No,
evidence
I
to
believe
prove
it too. I believe it too, based on what I've
it.
seen. Yeah.
This is where we say I love you, or we say it's where people's eyes are wide open, their hearts are beating like crazy. It might be similar to also in hypnosis, the reorientation reflex, where people reorient and are very open. So at that moment, so the flattergasm is the idea that you flatter people all the way to orgasm, meaning they become very suggestible, and you might, for example, the way you would do it is you would ask somebody, what would you like to hear about yourself that you almost don't believe? You know, a lot of people are very beautiful, but they don't believe it. A lot of people are very brilliant, but they don't believe it deep down. So you hypnotize them, you flatter them with these things that they should know about themselves that are highly complimentary. And then at the exact moment of orgasm is where you kind of apply the biggest compliment. And what is beautiful is to see the person orgasming to how great they are.
That is
You
so awesome. Oh my God, I'm gonna do that as soon as I can. It's happening tonight.
yeah, flattergasm. But we found like a whole bunch of these. So mangasm, flattergasm, musicgasm, which is you can tune somebody to music,
Mhm.
um, and that the hits within the music can actually become orgasmic for the person. Um, you can do a confidence gasm. You can where you sort of celebrate your confidence. You can do a directed love gasm. So this is where you're trying to send love to somebody you love. And there's a whole, as you know, once you get deep into hypnotic trance, there are no limits. Um, People can have flying orgasms. They can be in their mind flying in the air. Um, you can drop them in a volcano and they can have a fiery hot volcano gasm. So she began exploring all the sort of wide potential, and her mission is essentially to have every possible orgasm on Earth
Oh,
without being touched. That's the catch, because she doesn't need to be touched,
mhm.
and also it makes it less complicated, I guess. And so she's
That
had,
in itself is there's so much potential there. Being able to be orgasmic without being touched.
mm,
Like even
and
just that line, it makes my mind explode. I'm like, oh my God, all these different ways you can explore pleasure and sensuality and healing and everything else.
and safety. Like
Yeah.
one thing that I have learned, um, I've had to learn. I learned doing this is that safety. It not only there's like this kind of like line where people say consent is sexy, which I think it is, but in this business, safety is sexy, and and it really is. Meaning we achieve these states because the person feels safe, and then you start thinking, wait a second. If making somebody feel safer will actually increase their sexual pleasure, why not make them feel even safer? Really, really promote, or not so much promote, but culture extreme safety. And so that, and you're doing it not just because it's the right thing to do, which it is, it's ethically the right thing to do, but also because it actually makes the entire process more pleasurable. And it's beautiful that these two things are lining up, meaning the more ethical and safe you are with people, actually the more pleasure they are usually going to have, even when you're playing naughty, so to speak.
Oh my God, there's so much more I want to hear about this entire documentary that you're doing. I did want to ask you, are there any dilemmas that you run into or any problems you run into when doing this kind of thing in a very public way?
Yes, so that's a very good question. I think it explains why, like why. So we should, we both know that the public doesn't know about this. Hypnotists know about it. I don't know if all hypnotists do. Even a lot of hypnotists or therapists don't know about this. I mean, as I would explain it very simply, is if you can get someone to achieve somnambulant trance, which is a deep hypnotic trance, you can usually, with their consent, bring them very quickly to orgasm. And almost, regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation, it's just there. And my theory in the film is what you're doing is you're getting into the sexual programming codes. And I can tell you like a funny story that really got me thinking about it. When I was a newspaper reporter in Montreal, I was sent to cover a really crazy, like just a weird wackadoodle story. In a suburb of Montreal, women and exclusively brunettes were all being attacked by a large owl. So the story was like women would step outside their houses in suburban Montreal, and an enormous owl would come out of a tree and land on their head and scratch their skulls and scalps in quite terrible ways. And so they brought in this ornithologist who first identified this weird side of it. It only happened to brunettes. And then the second part of it was he explained eventually they caught the owl and took it away. The story was that what probably happened was that the the owl, when it was young or when it was born, had fallen out of its nest, and probably a very nice lady, a woman who happened to have brown hair, probably rescued it or just put it back in its nest. And the ornithologist explained birds sexually imprint in 15 seconds. So it may be that that moment or that the owl experienced this imprinting experience with this woman, and now it is destined for life to mate with the top of women's heads.
Oh my God.
But okay, so that's mind blowing. But so I went after I did this story and I or knew about this. I then talked to international experts on sexuality, and I said, okay, we all know that birds can sexually imprint, and like a tiny window opens and the bird is imprinted for life. I said, well, what about humans?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is like it might have changed because these interviews were done a few years ago, but the answer at the time was we don't know. We actually don't know, and there's no reason to believe that there isn't something similar, meaning that humans have these windows. I think my sense is we probably have a few, meaning you have these key experiences as you go through adolescence or maybe pre-adolescence where you experience something of a sexual nature. And if the window is open, that determines your sexual destiny for life. And this explains sort of like kinks and also weird obsessions and also a lot of dysfunction. Because if you have, if the window opened and you happen to be getting a spanking, which actually completely makes sense. No wonder, let's say, spankings are such a common fetish because if you're over somebody's lap and you're experiencing like unintentional sexual stimulation, plus you're being spanked, which is what in hypnosis, a shock induction, which
Yes.
sends the
Yeah,
suggestion deep,
exactly.
and your sexual destiny is being formed right there. You have no choice, you have no agency, you have no say in the matter. And then you spend the rest of your life, trying to talk people into like helping you achieve this sort of odd, I'm not saying it's odd, but I'm saying maybe an unusual thing that you have no idea how it got there. And this part of human sexuality is poorly understood. One of the shocking things, and I wanted to tell you, like that blew my mind, is so again, we're mentioning like a good number of hypnotists know about this phenomena, sexual hypnosis or erotic hypnosis. The public barely knows about it, because it hasn't maybe hit the mainstream, but the scientific community doesn't know about it either. And I had a neuroscientist sit down and explain to me, he said, you're sitting on something kind of crazy here because the proof, he said, like the scientific world's a big world. Like, how can you declare that the scientific world doesn't know something? Well, he said, in orgasm research, and orgasm research is done all over the world, they do it a certain way. You go into the laboratory with your porn magazine or your videos or your laptop or your vibrator, whatever you normally use to arrive at orgasm, and it's this uncomfortable, messy business because you're attached to electrodes, and then you got to pull out your vibrator, and everybody's watching or whatever. Well, if you use hypnosis, you could lie people in their beds, all comfortable, very private. You could put them into trance, they would all achieve orgasm precisely at the same time with a good hypnotist. And that could be measured and studied in a very scientific way, unlike the way it's studied now in this kind of like haphazard, unscientific way.
Yeah, I always think that the situation is so odd. Like the
Yes.
situation for studying orgasm and studying sexuality, I'm like, that's not a natural situation. Nobody's going to respond in that environment the way they do in real life. So, how can you get real information there?
I think you're dead right. And as you probably know, I don't know if you've been to, as part of this process, now it might have changed a little bit, but as part of this process, I went to sexology conferences, sexuality forums, and to find sort of experts in this area. I was shocked. I was shocked. These sex conferences are so boring. They're unbelievably boring. There's like, you don't have to worry about any sex going on there. There isn't. I might be, maybe again, maybe things have changed. I went a few years back. I've been working on this for a little while, but there's no sexuality. They've never heard of erotic hypnosis. They talk about like sexual dysfunction. There is real science because they've done massive studies of rats and stimulation of rat sexuality and that kind of thing. But but the reality of sexuality is over here in our world, and the science is like way over there. It's completely different.
It's so
Um,
different. But even like what you just said right there with sexual dysfunction, I really hate that word and where it relates to hypnosis is a lot of times what people are calling dysfunction is just that their body's not functioning the way that they want it to, like
yes,
mentally want it to, but their body is functioning exactly the way that a body should with the environment that it's being given.
yes,
And a lot of times that environment is not even a physical environment, it's an emotional or mental environment where that's where hypnosis comes into play. So if you can create a positive environment where your body can respond erotically or maybe the way you would like it to respond, now your body's actually functional. There's no dysfunction. It's doing exactly what it should be doing to the environment of stress or fear or anxiety or unsafety that you're giving to it, or even unerotic. If you're not into, a lot of people who are in very sorry, but boring long-term relationships where there's no sexual variety or there's no consideration to what the person actually gets off on,
I
how are you
think you're,
supposed to how are you supposed to respond to that?
yes, I think you're
That's not
referring
dysfunction.
to the norm,
Yeah.
the norm. Yeah, no, I mean, one thing I learned at these conferences was that I think 60, I forgot the percentage, I think 60% or so of marriages are, I know it's the weird word, are sexually dysfunctional, meaning people are not really, they're not, they're not having meaningful sex with their partners, um, which is a crisis. It's a serious crisis. They can't be happy. And I think also I should explain too. I think I've experienced this too, where I had a relationship with somebody I really loved, and I think that it went the standard trajectory where when we lost the oxytocin bonding, and because our sexuality was not conscious, we sort of lost sexual desire. And I didn't have any tools, and we neither of us had any tools to do anything about it. And I think, I don't think, by the way, that erotic hypnosis is the solution for everything, but it is a big solution. It could be a big part of the solution. I mean,
It's a big
I think,
tool. It's a
yes,
tool in your entire toolbox for maintaining great relationships.
yes. And I can even tell you why. So like, if see, look, I mean, we are speculating because again, this is an area that's not researched, that you can't find a lot of studies on erotic hypnosis, but there's an obvious explanation for what we're seeing or what's going on. This is how I try to explain to people. Um, Sex by itself is a pretty weird thing to do. I mean, if you think about animals, animals know, okay, I got to, if I was a tiger, I know I got to chase down that antelope and I eat it. Like that's what I do. That's a pretty straightforward thing to do. Chase the antelope and then eat it. Sex is like a really weird thing to do. I've got to go find another version of something like me. I've got to get the genders, or maybe not, or I have to sort out the parts. I have to like arrange myself physically in the right way, and I have to do it long enough so that I produce an orgasm and ejaculation in the case of, I guess, in the case of the male. But what I'm saying, the reason I'm saying it is, it's a bizarre thing to do. It requires a lot of programming for an animal to figure out how to have sex. And by the way, this is not like a fringe activity. The survival of the species is based on it. So at some point, we are programmed to do this. Well, the answer is fairly obvious. It's just it's an uncomfortable subject. Um, you can it's known, and it's also a sex. The structure of it is usually described in a sexist way, which is the programming codes for sexuality are installed in wet dreams. So this is often stereotyped around young men, where young men have dreams where they kind of, without realizing it, they are programmed into their sexuality. Again, no agency. They're usually not talking to people about it. They're very ashamed and embarrassed. It's just, and of course, now we know that women have them too. I mean, there's actually no difference. In fact, I was shocked to learn that one of the weird aspects of REM state dreaming is very common for both penises and clitorises to become erect during REM state dreaming.
Hmm.
It's and this is important because we as hypnotists believe that there's a direct connection between REM states and hypnotic states, but the scientific community rejects that. They're like, no, it's not true.
It's
So,
it's really interesting that you say that. One of the first, when I first learned hypnosis, like first class I ever took, and I everything I learned I just sort of test out secretly on my clients. And what I was noticing was that every time I would put a guy into trance, he would get a hard on. Like just from being in trance. I was like, ooh, there's something here. And that's when I started to get into the idea of erotic or sexual hypnosis because I hadn't really heard of it before. I just took hypnosis because I thought, okay, mind body stuff, and then I heard about erotic hypnosis. But that's a really interesting connection there.
can
And
I
it,
take it? Can I take
yeah,
it a step? I
please
think
do.
you're on to there. I was going to say, like, I mean, part of what got me going on this was seeing these stage hypnosis shows, but I also have seen that same phenomena that you're describing. But I would take it, what I would take it a step further. I don't, I do not think that erotic hypnosis is an exotic state, meaning that's how we see it, as something
Mhm.
strange and exotic. If we go to Ericksonian hypnosis, so Erickson is the concept of permissive states, that people want to go into trance already. They want to experience calm and relaxation and serenity. Take that a step further, and I would say you've got Ericksonian hypnotic sexuality, which means the body already wants to enter into bliss and ecstatic states. All
Mhm.
it is the container. And you are obviously providing the container for these men, unconsciously probably, to feel comfortable and safe. And like I don't think there's anything weird about that. I think that's probably natural and healthy. We've just been all shamed out of it.
Coming back to what you were saying about how sex is a weird thing anyway, I think all animals have instinctive sexuality, but we're not doing it remotely close to the way primal instinctive procreative sexuality is. That
Well,
where we're paying attention to primal hormonal procreative fertility and virility and health and all that kind of stuff. You
right,
know, the male monkeys are not chasing down the fertile females. It's not allowed
right.
in our culture. We're doing something completely different than what our instincts would have us do. And we're also, it's become extremely complicated, like very much away from that primal aspect of it, where it's for recreation, not procreation. And we have pretty high expectations of it, very high expectations. And then layered on top of those, let's just say physical pleasure expectations, there's stuff like, well, I want somebody who's worthy of my attention. So there's all these other things, and it's become something totally different. And of course, we don't know what the heck we're doing. It's a skill. I think it's an art, like
Right,
a real, true art to immerse yourself in, to really be fluent in this language of sexuality and
right.
interacting with others.
That's why your work is so valuable because you create these ongoing conversations around one dilemma or another. I fully agree. I mean, I think Annie Sprinkle famously said that it's not that we're immature sexually, it's like that we're in kindergarten,
Yeah.
that we know virtually nothing. And we know this because you see people that there's so much more. It's a whole universe that can be explored. And you had asked me about the dilemmas and the problem. We still live in a culture. What's confusing about our world is we live in a culture that is officially sexually liberated, but it's also so not. It's not sexually liberated. There's yeah, one of the things I've noticed, like one of the reasons I was reluctant to make this film was one, I knew I was going to be like in the ghetto right away, the sexual ghetto, as if I did this work or said I would or made these demonstrations because I had seen it happen to people where a hypnotist demonstrated something that was of sexual nature, and people were like, "Well, already hypnotists are seen as sort of sometimes sketchy, and now you're even sketchier, and there's no ethical structure to sort of explain, no, this can be quite conscious, it can be quite safe, it's very consensual, more consensual the better. So it's still very much, and it might be interesting to ask. I mean, the reason partly it's called Make Orgasms Not War too is I would say if you look at this in a kind of polar way, anybody who understands hypnotic sexuality knows that it's actually an abundance model, meaning
Hmm.
more people having more orgasms, more ways, while the rest of the world or the people that run this world actually are really into and benefit from the sexual scarcity model, like right down to the people that are most public right now, like Donald Trump. I give that example because the whole sort of honeypot, I think if you know what I mean by the honeypot trap. So powerful men are often trapped because the mafia knows this, and Vladimir Putin knows this, and powerful people know this, that men are vulnerable often to their peculiar sexual desires. And that's the whole story about Trump. Like, we don't know what it is, but he's got some weird kink that he's so ashamed of. And it's, the story. It may not be true, but I think it's probably true that the Russians have, filmed him in a sense desperately acting out his sexual destiny. We're going right back to the owl landing on women's heads. It's this sorry, it's this destiny that he has no control over, is working below the level of consciousness that he's desperately seeking. And he also feels that if I finally achieve it, the story is that he wanted prostitutes to urinate on him. Some part of him is, if I finally achieve this, I am real. But of course, he is trapped in the the honey trap, and and he is tortured and controlled by people in power. But this metaphor actually applies to a lot of people who are honey trapped in other ways, meaning honey trapped by porn, honey trapped by vibrators, honey trapped by um, the perceived peculiarity of their sexuality.
Perceived is the main word too, because no matter how weird they think it is, or how weird they think it sounds, guarantee there's a lot of other people that are experiencing the same desire or the same sort of fixation or obsession. And it's the shame over it that has control over us, not the thing itself.
Exactly.
If you embrace the thing itself, then nobody has any power over you.
That's right. That's right. If you're like, it's okay. Yeah. If you're like, I'm proud of of what
I
I
love
do.
being peed on. It's so
Yeah,
warm and delicious. Then,
yeah.
like, what are you gonna do? Shame me? Oh, I'll pee on you. Yes, please.
What
Okay.
do you do? Put on me? Yeah, yeah. No, exactly. That's exactly it. And but the shame machine is out there, and it's very powerful. And I think, unfortunately, also it gets mixed up with progressive movements as well. I'd say one of the risks I feel as a man doing this is I'm aware that women, not women, I don't say women, but maybe there's a percentage of the population that is very nervous about the male hypnotist sometimes seems to embody some evil villain characteristics because, authoritarian, snapping his fingers, telling women what to do, seemingly having a lot of control. Um,
Actually, this is a big subject in the kink community. The unethical Dom hypnotist embedding secret commands for codependency and, well,
yes.
dependency in general. So there's a lot, yeah, there's a lot of stuff around that.
Right. And you're like, that's real. And that is real. The whole pickup artist community are trained in some, not all of them, but I mean, some of them are trained in sort of basic hypnotic techniques designed to manipulate
Mhm.
people. And, and, and so there is a problem. That's why it needs to come to the surface. I mean, one thing I like to say is this is obviously the codes, the sexual codes belong to all humanity. They don't belong to hypnotists, and they certainly don't belong to pickup artists. They belong to everyone, and everyone should have a right to have some access to their own sexual codes.
That's such a
Uh,
great point. Such an amazing point because people are trying to keep this information from young people, from innocent people, from religious people, whatever it is. But there are going to be unethical people who want power and who want control and who want to do bad things. They're going to be out there. No matter what we
yeah,
do and no matter how much we want to avoid them, they're there. So if we, instead of being vulnerable and ignorant, teach ourselves and teach our children and teach our clients and teach people how to know yourself, how to recognize what feels right and wrong, and how to avoid people who would maybe manipulate or have power over you in some negative way, then this is a good thing.
absolutely.
This is a great thing.
That's right. That's why, I mean, it's something that there should be like an association of ethical, sexual hypnotists who create sort of ethical rules and also just give information because I think people are leery about it maybe for good reason. Um, and you're right, the manipulators are out there. I mean, in fact, it is the predators who are almost more prominent. There's a guy who has a big YouTube channel. I can't remember what it's called. It's Entrainment, where he basically takes women and turns them into robots and attractive women. Are hypnotized just to look like statues, hypnotized statues. And of course, it's sort of like weirdly sexy, but it's also disrespectful. And it's also not like I think there is a route. Maybe a better way of saying this is that there is a path, and I think you are on this path, but there is a path to using these tools for sexual healthiness. Like I can give a very simple example. Like one is, um, like I experienced in my own life where when I first discovered my sexuality, I found I would have orgasms, like I said, about dumb things, like things that are they're just totally meaningless. Somebody's dress or the way a woman walked past me or just and and then it occurred to me, why not have an orgasm about somebody that I love or even an orgasm which I have found the most valuable, where I just appreciate how healthy and good my body feels. And that created a sea change in my mind where I just noticed that
I
I
have to remind
felt
myself to do that one too later.
yes. Um, but this is a thing that we know also in erotic hypnosis, that you can use orgasm as a target state, this is important because in normal sexuality, people are chasing that rare thing. I can only have an orgasm if you are wearing leather and you say these words and the pace is like this, and there's like this whole list of things and that list keeps growing for most people. Like they got
Oh
more,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
yet the what's really important, and this is like a explosive point, trance. See, one of my theories about trance, and again, there's a lack of evidence, so you don't, we're just like people speculating here, is by definition, trance is about adaptation. I learned this kind of the hard way. I remember, I remember being struck by, I got into, it's a weird story, but when I was a reporter, I was behind the lines during the Oka crisis, and there was another reporter. I used to was like a kind of comic character where I would often sing, because we were stuck in a military situation, very stressful, and the army would sometimes point guns at us or spotlights at us at night. So I would, if a spotlight would come on me, I would sing. And at one point, it ended up on the national news. They didn't know what it was. They were like, there was an incident on the lines in the Oka crisis, and it was like me, just singing a song under this army spotlight. Make a long story short, one of the other reporters physically attacked me when he saw this because he thought I was like discrediting reporters, and we got into a really violent brawl. And because I was like the guy was trying to kill me, smashed my head against a cement wall, and not only that, there were guns all over the place. And what happened is the Mohawk warriors that were there actually stuck AK-47s into our backs to stop us from fighting. Anyway, it was an awful experience, but I remember us being struck by afterwards that we were both in trance. We were stuck with each other, and we both went into trance. And you stare out the window, and people that go through trauma go into trance. And so when I went back to that memory, I started noticing that it was me kind of sorting through things, and that there's an adaptive quality to trance. Trance makes us actually more flexible. So actually, that was a long way of saying that what is also explosive about hypnotic sexuality is that it creates more flexible states. And I've done these experiments with people, and you might try them too, where I ask somebody, what's something that you traditionally really don't like? Not something awful, but something like a kind of sexuality that has never really appealed to you. And then you hypnotize the person, and then you bring them to orgasm doing that, like, maybe vanilla type sex, or um, something that they wouldn't normally, and then they go, oh, actually, I really enjoyed it. So what that is to me is a demonstration that you create a more flexible state if people are in trance,
Yeah.
and you can get around the fact that, and I think we're all this way, you can get around the fact that people are fixated on very specific things. And I think men more than women, from my experience, but where they have a laundry list of things that need to, like, the sun has to be here, the moon has to be there. You have to make this facial expression. Could you wear this set of underwear? Okay, now I can have an orgasm. Well, you put that person in trance, and none of that matters. They're way more flexible, and then that can be a movement towards a more open sexuality for that person.
That's a really great point. I have seen it that way as well, where trance creates a flexibility. So it's not like, especially if somebody likes their kink or likes their fixation or really becomes aroused by it, you don't have to get rid of it. You just have to
No,
expand your sexuality so you can be aroused by more things so that you and your chosen partner, you overlap. You don't have to overlap like completely. Like I'm making motions here like I'm on video, but if you think of a Venn diagram with two overlapping circles, as long as you overlap enough, then you've got enough to go on with your partner. If there's no overlap because you're so specific and they're so rigid that you can't do anything, then you're kind of stuck there, especially if you want to be in a monogamous relationship. But if you become more flexible, then at least you have layers that overlap, and that's where you can explore together.
I think
And yeah.
you're totally right. I think you're totally right. I think of an example just that exactly relates to that was that I had a client who had a foot fetish, and it was an issue because his wife felt that, you're in love with my feet, you're not in love with me. so of course I asked him, well, is that true? Is it that you want to make love to your wife's feet, but you don't want to make love to her? And he says, no, it's not true. I love my wife, but it was this is an example of how program supersedes behavior. He in when they would act out their sexuality, he would be, oh, can I just, go to your feet? It didn't mean he didn't love her, but that's the way it would normally work. So you probably would guess what you would do. So you put him into trance, and you have both things there. You say, okay, how do you feel about your wife's feet? Oh, very sexually excited. How do you feel about your wife? Oh, I love her a lot. Oh, well, let's just mix those two up.
Hmm.
Why don't you take that powerful arousal feeling that you feel for your wife, sorry, for your wife's feet, and mix it and see her totality, see her love. And now there's a kind of hotness everywhere. And that in a sense cured him. He was able to now, you know, uh, he didn't release the kink, but he was able to be flexible enough to be like, okay, that warm, loving feeling that feet used to give me, I can now feel it for my whole life.
It's fun that you use feet. There's a lady that I see a few times a year for massage, and one time she was going to a foot fetish party later that evening, and she'd never been before. She was just going with a friend to keep them company. So I said, well, do you want to make it more fun? And I hypnotized her and programmed it in so that her feet became extremely erotic. And everything she felt in her feet and her toes, she actually felt in her pussy. And this was years ago, and she still has the erotic feet. So now when people play with her feet, she's like, oh, she responds very sexually. And I would have done that to the wife too, to make sure that
Yeah.
when he does
Oh,
play with her, she doesn't feel like, oh God, this again. I got to tolerate this foot stuff. But instead, it's like, oh yeah, I can enjoy this. It's not everything I like, but at least it's yummy for me as well. I think it's
yeah,
nice to be able to join. If your partner gets really turned on by something, why not join them?
right. That's the other
Yeah.
thing too. Is that of course we're so afraid and rigid that there's a fear of, yeah, there's a fear of these things. There's a fear of making people happy. We somehow think that if people get what they want, then that's bad. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah, like we're conceding ourselves
Yeah.
by by joining our partner in something different that maybe we're not joining them in yet.
What I was going to say too, one of the things you referenced before was the this phenomena, which we should point out that there are erotic hypnotists or hypnotists who use manipulative tactics, even to, like, for example, get into a relationship with somebody by hypnotizing them to be in the relationship in a sense, and also to, let's say, associate that person with positive sexual experiences. But I often say to people, that is no different from human behavior. Like, a lot of people know, and I think often this is more in heterosexual context, more women, that if they addict men to to associating them with orgasms, then those men will become emotionally attached to them.
Oh yeah.
What's the
It's
what's
like
the
the
difference?
oldest female trick in the book.
Exactly. And that's the same form of manipulation. That guy may not really love you. He's just dependent on you.
Yeah.
And Um, so what I'm saying is that what I find with hypnosis is that people tend to seize on these things because they can see it. They can see, wow, that's powerful. That could be manipulative. But I even notice the same thing about in generally in hypnosis, people talk about, well, that kind of control. You can turn somebody into you can make somebody say what you want them to say, or turn them into a chicken, or whatever it is. I'm like, see, I worked in film and theater. I do still do, and I'm like, have you been to a theater rehearsal? In a theater rehearsal, the director tells you where to stand, when, what words to say, and how to say them. I mean, if you want to see humans controlling other humans, go to a theater, go to a play. You know, my point is, it's not that weird. The actor wants the direction. And similarly, in hypnosis, the subject often wants the direction from the hypnotist. It's not being imposed.
it's not weird at all. I give my partner my total handbook to push all my buttons and be able to affect me in all of these different ways because I trust he has positive intent. I like being affected positively. So why not give him all my buttons and the
I
codes?
agree. I agree.
So
And
I think it's
that's
great.
that's a great name for a game handbook.
That is the
Here's
name I use for it actually.
yeah.
Is creating a personal handbook about yourself and giving it to the person that you want to do nice things for you or to get along with so that you can know each other's handbooks and know how better to affect each other in relationship, because how often do we shut down our partners and turn them off and push them away when we could have done the opposite if we'd known their little sequences.
Totally true. And you know what I think that is? I think one of the most common kinks that is out there is the kink around believing that somebody already knows what you like. So, so this person is really sexy because they seem to already know what I love. But that's if you'd given them the handbook, then they would. And
Oh, yes.
yeah,
It's funny that you call that a kink. I've always called it being irresponsible and passive. Wanting the other person to just do everything
right.
without
Tell me,
having to tell them what to do or tell them
right,
what you want or tell them what you need, because it's really vulnerable to ask for stuff. It's really vulnerable to say,
right.
hey, the way that you've been doing things hasn't really been working for me.
Yes,
Could you please do this? Because there's a risk of them saying no. And then you
yeah,
feel like, oh, I'm not important enough. So I do think that this is actually a whole nother subject, which I'll save for another day, just because
yeah, of course. You're
I
right.
feel like we have enough for one podcast. But oh my God, I want to interview you again because you have so many great things to say.
Thank you.
This is a really, really great point, is giving the other people the information that they need to positively influence and manipulate you.
That's right. And this is why we need we need to raise that sex has to come
Mhm.
out of the ghetto, and we have
Mm.
to raise the level of quality of sexual dialogue. I suggest a game to people called questionnaire, where the idea is that there's like a series of questions where, and they can be sort of how hot do you find this? Do you like this? I mean, somebody should make the questionnaire, and you pretend to be asking someone the questionnaire, and they tell you their story, and and you're right. Then of course your sex lives improve immediately because I've said this that the worst feeling in the world. I mean, there are many terrible feelings, but one of the worst feelings in the world is having spent hours doing something to somebody only to find out later that they really didn't like it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's the worst.
Yes.
For the listeners, people really like it when you make it easy for them to turn you on. So if you're not communicating and you're hiding what you need to be pleased in life, to make you happy, thinking, oh, they should figure it out, help them figure it out, because it's probably one of the best ways to be lovable is to make it really easy to love you, easy to do what you need and want, because we
Well
all
said.
want to please our partners, and also easy to turn on. So
Yes.
if you don't know what you like, figure out what you like and help them do it.
Yes. Hallelujah. I think really well said, and again, maybe the question to ask is why wouldn't we? And people have all these sort of funny reasons. One, that we're afraid to talk about what we want, as you said. Two, that we're afraid to appear demanding, even though we'll be demanding about a whole bunch of other things. We don't want to make these demands and I think interesting, men and women have their own reasons. For men, we're afraid to sound like um, because we've had our feminist training, like these demanding males going like you got to go down on me like this or whatever it is. That's our thing. And then women are already acculturated to feel like that they can't ask for what they need. But what I'm saying is that there's different reasons for there's different reasons why we do this, but it results in everybody being in a kind of cone of silence are not being very good at asking for what they want. But even the other aspect is they often don't even know.
Hmm.
They don't they don't know what they want, and because they haven't asked themselves that question. They haven't explored what really makes them feel good and happy and aroused, or they haven't had the room to explore it.
Well, isn't the sort of standard narrative about men, oh, you should just be happy that I'm naked. Like you should be grateful that there's a woman around you and maybe that she's even potentially interested in sex. So be grateful and shut up and don't ask for anything else because that's what you get. And if you're a man, that you should be glad about that. And then so that's the training that men get, or like kind of what's shoved down their throat. And then for women, the training they get is the idea that they exist to arouse a man. So they're
Right.
not even experiencing what turns them on because that's not what they're even thinking about. They're thinking about, am I looking good enough? Am I behaving sexy enough? Am I giving enough head to make sure he's hard? And that's the process that's going on. It's not, ooh, am I enjoying this? Oh, what do I need to actually be getting more aroused? They're not thinking that at all, or thinking about how to help him help her. And it's this silly, silly, silly dynamic, which is just keeps people far apart instead of turning each other on more.
And intriguingly, we're all being gaslit by this sort of wider concept that the sexual revolution happened. So
Oh yeah.
we're all baffled by the fact that we don't do things right, or we don't know, but we're still profoundly ignorant. I often tell this story. I went to a really interesting sexual workshop in Mexico, and people told their shame stories, and it was fascinating. It blew my mind, and I realized I had a pretty good one, which I can tell, which is just when I first was an example of how not knowing stuff is potentially destructive in fairly dramatic ways. Anyways, I didn't know much about how orgasms worked, and I remember I think it was like 13 or 14, and I had my first orgasm like quite by accident almost in the bathtub. And first of all, I remember it being it was like a mind-blowing experience because it was just off the scale pleasure from what and I didn't, um, it is nothing I'd ever experienced before. But here's the weird part. It suddenly dawned on me that I had ejaculated in the bathtub that was like a family bathtub. And I was like, oh my God, my mother and my sister use the same bathtub. What if they get pregnant? And I was so like paranoid about it that I had this fantasy of my father giving me this lecture, like where he said, my God, Albert, you, you've gotten your mother pregnant. And I was horrified. And but I really believe it. And then I remember my sister, like, a few hours later or something, I think it was a weekend, saying, I might go up and have a bath. And I was like, oh, like I would do that. And
Oh God. Oh, you poor thing.
the point is, like, of course, I didn't know anything, and that ignorance really counts in sex, not knowing stuff. And I'll give you like a really big crazy story that it's lovely to talk to you because one of the things is I've been sitting on a bunch of interviews, things that blew my mind that I was never really able to talk about. But this really blew my mind. So I did not know that at a critical moment, the American Psychological Association, which is very influential, defined sex. And the reason why they did is they were so big into definitions of abnormal sex. They were like, this is abnormal, that's abnormal. At one point, homosexuality was abnormal. They had all these like lists of abnormal sex. So I think a lot of people said to them, well, then what's normal? Like, how do we need to define what normal sexuality is so we know what it is. So the official definition, and I think this was until either the late 80s or early 90s, the official definition for normal sex, meaning what you're supposed to do, is sexual intercourse between a man and a woman. Now, at first, that might not sound that weird, but actually, it is weird because, as you know, it is very hard for women to come to orgasm solely through vaginal stimulation. So right there, they condemned women to decades of non-orgasmic states, because if normal sex is sexual intercourse between a man and woman, there's all these women going, well, I'm having normal sex, why can't I have an orgasm? And everyone's wondering it. We're having normal sex, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that there is no real definition of what normal sexuality is, so wide open, and that definition has been immensely destructive, very, very destructive. And I mean, it's not just because it's heteronormative, but also because it denied women orgasm so thoroughly. Um, and that was mind blowing for me when and this is also not well known. There's a lot of crazy things about sexual research not well
Mo
known.
Most of the problems that people come to me for would not be problems if they didn't consider intercourse to be the most important thing about sex.
Yes,
And I'm like, intercourse is just a small part of a really big and complex pizza. Like, it's just a part of it. And if it happens, yay, if it feels good. If it feels good. If it doesn't feel good, then why should it have to happen? And of course, there's ways to make it feel good, but sometimes people can't have it.
that's
Sometimes
right.
just there's a lot of reasons why a man may never have intercourse, particularly, injury, illness, meds, all kinds of different reasons. But it's just a piece. So,
Right.
so like let it go and focus on what actually feels good.
You're dead right. And it's again the curse. It's the curse of the American Psychological Association, where by creating this deep, I mean, I think it resonated with sort of a cultural idea that at its basis, loving sexuality is intercourse, and it isn't. And not only that, it's like a terrible trap, you know. Um, and so and you're right. So many men and women suffer because, and I think about relationships too, where I remember first thinking about this, where where I sort of felt like a relationship did not consummate. I mean, that's the term.
Yeah, it's not
But
legitimate unless there's intercourse.
there you go.
What?
Mm.
So crazy. I actually won't work with, I made a decision a little while ago. I will not work professionally in terms of couples counseling or therapeutic aspect with religious people from the States because I cannot overcome their God and what they say God says about sex. Because in every single circumstance where somebody says, I have erectile dysfunction, what they have is a religious marital container where some things are appropriate and some things are not appropriate. And what's happening is that they're not aroused by the container that they're in. But they're not allowed to consider things that are outside of that container, and they're not allowed to do things differently. And so the primary focus is on making sure he gets hard so that they can have sex legitimately. And that's it. That's it. There's no flexibility. And I'm like, okay, well, the way that I work doesn't work within that structure. So we're not in alignment here. And rather than battle that and frustrate them and frustrate me because we just can't see on the same page, I just decided, okay, I'm not going to work with that type of person in that context. Now, will I spank them professionally and get paid for it? Sure, but I won't. But I won't do sex therapy.
Speaking of spanking, isn't it? It just came out that Stormy Daniels spanked Trump with the cover, with a magazine with the cover of
Oh my God.
his picture on it. Because I was like, there's like your definition of the narcissistic loop,
Oh
where
my God.
his own face, he's being spanked with his own face.
Anything else I have to say to that is not appropriate for public consumption. So I'm going to wait until we stop recording before I say anything more. All right, Albert, it was really great to speak to you. I hope I can have you on again
Yeah,
because you just
yeah.
have so many awesome things to say and really, really important information to share with people. So I thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. It's very
I
kind.
can't thank you enough. It's so needed and so wonderful.
Yeah, I hope, by the way, I'm hoping, sorry, probably off topic, is that I'm hoping we can catch up and possibly, because I may be doing interviews at Hypnothoughts along these lines. So I probably will want to ask you some questions if you're game.
Yes. Yeah, I'll be there, and I am game. And I wanted to say, if people want to see more of you and hear more of you, where can they do that?
So my hypnosis website is called hypnologist.net. My the on Facebook or in other places you can find the videos of the documentary Make Orgasms Not War. It probably won't be out. We're probably gonna have it out late fall. And where else? I also do, if you're just laughter stuff, I'm laughologist.info. But yeah, probably Make Orgasms Not War is mostly about what we've been talking about so far.
Okay, I'll put all of those links on the page so that people can hunt you down.
All right.
And thanks very much. I'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure. It was fantastic.